Welcome, it's October 3rd, 2023. It's been an unseasonably hot day. I thought it was warm yesterday. It's particularly warm today with more heat coming, but we'll take it, and I appreciate the cool of this evening after spending a good chunk of the day on the third floor of this house on Winslow with the heat from the roof right there. So it's cool. Crickets are out, and so am I, thinking about being present. This is an extension of self-erasure because, of course, dissociation can be a form of self-erasure, or self-erasure can be a form of dissociation. Maybe more technically correct said. So, one of the things that I've noticed, being an adult in my 50s who's done some healing, there are many things that are different. Many things about how I navigate myself and how I navigate the world that are very different than 8 or 10 years ago. Thank goodness. But one of the most lovely is my ability to be present. My ability to be present is significantly improved. And it's also true that once you learn how to go away, right? Once your parts learn how to go away, there's always at least a part of you that knows how to flee. So that shows up sometimes. Sometimes it shows up at not the most opportune times, and it's caused me problems. Not terrible problems, but problems with people who care about me who haven't really understood what was happening. And of course, I'm not in a position to be able to explain what's happening when I'm fleeing into that space, that space behind you that doesn't have a name, but it's very familiar. So I don't stay in those spaces long. I used to live there. I used to live there years and years and years at a time. So when you aren't present, you're missing out on things. I know this may sound very basic, very reductionist, but having some degree of presence is required for you to experience deeply the good stuff that's happening also. And of course, that's the nature of dissociation, or that's the nature of the shutdown response, is very often we don't selectively shut down. We don't, turn off only the breakers that are problems for us. We tend to turn off all of the breakers, or most of the breakers when we're about when we're about surviving by shutting down, by disconnecting. And of course, disconnecting for me has a history. It has a history because when I was young, my presence was a problem. My mom married a man who was not my father, and he had feelings about that. He had insecurities about that. He had his own big demons that were not improved by tours in Vietnam. So I was a problem. My existence was a problem. And if you're a kid in that environment and you try to be what people need you to be, but you can't be what an insecure man needs you to be because you're not in charge of things that happen before you're born. So you can't. You're simply in this state where your existence is a problem and you pay the tax for that existence. And you can't ever get ahead of it. You can't ever fix it. You can't get ahead of it. And virtually nobody sees it but the two of you see it. So if that's the case, you have very, very few options. You can't make yourself a problem. Making yourself a problem is only going to make your problems worse. And you can't fix the problem because the problem is existential. It's a problem of existence rather than a problem of behaviors. And the only thing that's left is for you to shrink yourself. And as I said in the other post, to try to figure out how to let things that are done be done, disappear, right? Disappear, wound. And I started that really young, and eventually it became a way of being instead of being something that would happen to me. Sometimes it was my pretty default state. And of course, middle school was not safe. I was one of a handful of white, skinny kids in the middle school. And I think a lot of the frustration and injustice and the turbulence of the early 80s, I was a pretty easy target for. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter that, I was really progressive for a kid, and I was, I remember why really bad things were happening. I am like the only non-racist in this whole effing city, and all this bad stuff's happening to me. So it, at the end of the day, middle school was an act of survival. It was an act of daily survival. And there were many, many, many times that I did not know that I was going to survive. There were many times where I didn't know that I did survive. I was on such a receiving end of so much persistent violence that I don't know how I survived. And of course, none of this, I don't know if none of this was improved or by the fact that as a kid I didn't bruise. I mean, you could throw me off a cliff and I could, hit 50 boulders going down the hill and I would not bruise. So there was no evidence after these horrible beatings were over, and once I was conscious, there was no evidence, right? No physical evidence that I wasn't okay. So how do you disappear from a middle school? How do you get home when you have to walk home? I don't know. I could never figure that out. But what I learned was to live in a pretty pervasive and disconnected and dissociated state. And that was helpful. That was helpful for the bad things that happened. Um, they kept happening, but I was at least partially protected from it. So, thank goodness, nervous system, that comes to numb what we can't find solutions for when we're kids in impossible situations. So of course I grow up. I moved to the country where I started high school and went to high school with two of my aunts. Aunt Laura was a senior when I was a freshman, and my Aunt Belinda was a sophomore when I was a freshman. And these were people who had been in every class together since kindergarten. And I was one of the first new students in that class in years. So high school was a very, very pleasant place for me. It was a place where, by then a lot of my really difficult childhood wounding was over. But then replace community violence with very, very unexpected community spiritual trauma that I'm not going to get into now. Let's just say I found myself in the Catholic Church, again, as survival. I didn't have a, Saul on the way to Damascus moment. I literally had communal spiritual experiences that scared the shit out of me and pretty much directed me to the Catholic Church as an answer to this really big, difficult series of experiences that I had. So, of course, if you are practiced at self-erasure, Catholicism may improve that. Catholicism may, it begins with the assumption that the body is bad. It begins with the assumption that a lot of what it is that makes you human is a problem. And that started to deeply resonate with me. Then fast forward until I'm a freshman in college, and I'm starting to really explore my spirituality, and I've access to a church library, and I'm reading about the saints, I'm reading about mysticism, I'm reading that you can starve yourself a path to God. And I did. And I erased everything. I erased myself. I erased instinct. I erased sex drive. I erased everything that was me. I erased emotions. I erased the capacity to have emotions. All of it. And I had what must be one of the most amazing, completely dissociated spiritual experiences in the history of Catholicism. It was, I cannot express how amazing that experience was, but it was not here. No part of it was in Natchitoches, Louisiana in 1989, 90, or 91. None of it. It was all completely dissociated into a whole other realm. And the task of self-erasure, if you're going to go down that road, the task of self-erasure, or the cost of self-erasure, is that you have to keep doing it. You cannot not pay that tax. You have to keep doing it. You have to, the road narrows, and it becomes more and more and more and more narrow. And if you let anything come in to distract you, it is very, very easy to fall. And it's not a when you're working at that level, it's not a very recoverable fall. So what happened to me was I went to confession in the cathedral at Catholic University when I was doing mission work in Washington, D.C. And an old priest with big robin blue eyes told me, "Tom, I think you're doing it wrong. The church needs you to be human. The church needs you to make mistakes. The church needs you to try and not make it," right? The church needs you to try to go under the limbo bar and not make it. The church needs you to be fallible. We don't know what to do with you if you are only erasing. We don't know what to do with you if you're not human. And by the way, God made you human on purpose. He knows what he's doing. So he encouraged me to go be human. But what that caused was for one of my feet to just slip right off that tiny, tiny path. And just like I didn't choose to come into my spirituality, I didn't choose to come out of it. That fall happened to me. I fought it the whole way down, but I fell and fell and fell. And then I fell into a body eventually. Months and months later, I fell into a body that I no longer knew how to work. My emotions didn't know how to move through me, and every time I have one, it would get stuck in this horrible, horrible somatic sensation that felt like being shot in the chest, that would come for several seconds or several minutes or several days. And becoming more embodied, or a little bit more embodied, after that was one of the most difficult things I've been through. And of course, no one could help me. No one had ever heard of that type of fall before. No one had ever experienced that type of fall before. But it was comprehensive. And when I fell, there were no usable pieces anywhere, right? Everything was broken. Absolutely everything in my universe, everything in my identity, everything in my world was in pieces and in shambles. And given the fact that I didn't have any real agency in any of this, given the fact that I didn't choose to become spiritual, and I didn't choose for my spirituality to end, and you're just going to have to trust me if that doesn't make sense. After I started getting my feet under me, and after I started figuring out how to move my emotions through me, the last thing in the world that I wanted, my biggest existential fear, was another calling, was the bad things that came to recruit me coming to recruit me again. So it doesn't matter whether anybody understands that, and you probably don't, and I don't, but what I'm telling you is that from 21 years old, probably until about 45 years old, my life was organized around not having a very big footprint. My life was organized around keeping my head down, not having any kind of big spiritual existential thoughts. And it was another big period of self-erasure. So EMDR therapy, believe it or not, EMDR therapy is what let me really get my feet under me. It's what let me put my head in the air. And when I first met with the therapist, she sized me up and thought I had pretty good adaptive information. I was pretty resourced, and she wanted to go at the stuff. She had experience with spiritual trauma, and she wanted to go at that stuff first. And I said, you can't. Fortunately, I was an EMDR therapist and knew a little bit about how the difficult stuff has to link into existing adaptive information. I said, I can't. That stuff you want to start with is the size of weather. And she said, oh. And I think she knew what I meant. And then we started with small stuff. We spent a lot of that summer working on my stepdad, working on the horrible violence of the elementary and middle school years. And then by the end of the summer, by the time we got to the spiritual stuff, a lot of it made sense. In the parts that didn't make sense, which were, I don't know what you know about the term incommensurable. It's a concept that means that things can't. Language breaks down across a barrier, so I'm not even going to try to explain how the spiritual stuff made sense or didn't make sense. Language is not the medium to try to explain those differences. But EMDR therapy resolved that, and it didn't resolve the things I knew spiritually. It didn't resolve a lot of that, but it gave me a path forward. And the path forward is I have options. I have options about the doors I open. I have options about what I give my attention to. And that was very, very helpful in letting me live more embodied and letting me think about spiritual things and existential things and think about my own life. And really, for the first time, it let my life feel like one single piece. It's one of the many things trauma does to you, is it throws a Mississippi River and a Grand Canyon and a massive, massive desert into your lifespan that makes it just really hard to just transit across your lifespan without having periods of rupture or gap or awfulness. But I say all of this to say, for a good 45 years, I didn't feel like I was allowed to be here. I didn't feel like this world was safe for me. So, and again, if you're kind of adding these pieces together, yes, this is what my nervous system knew. When I was a kid, home wasn't safe, the community wasn't safe, school wasn't safe. And now, the universe and truth and stuff out in the universe isn't safe. So, if that's true, you're gonna learn. You have to learn how to disappear. You have to learn how to disappear. So, I'm learning now how to be here. I'm learning now how to, experience things. I'm learning now how to slow down and experience love. I'm learning now how to try to say what my needs are. I'm learning now how to be present with very, very small things, right? Small things that, I don't know. I'm learning how to be present with a cup of coffee. And that, I cannot tell you. If you're like, Tom, at 16, I knew how to be present with a cup of coffee. Well, hats off to you. Hats off to you, my friend. Me being present for a cup of coffee, or me being present in my body in a concert and feeling the vibrations of those big speakers showing up in my body, or me being present when someone is giving me their full attention, is like coming home when you've never been there. So now is a cliche, right? Be present. Being present, that's a cliche, right? We say these things. But I'm learning how to live there. I'm learning how to embody it. I'm learning how to literally live there. And as my therapist at the time said, is that you have to do this sometime, right? We have to heal. We have to learn how to do this at some point in our life. And I'm doing it now. And I'm thankful that there's still life left. There's still possibility left. And I'm trying to slow down and just notice as much of it as I can. So those are some thoughts about being present and about how being so productive and so ambitious and so whatever for so long was literally a survival strategy, was literally what was absolutely needed to keep myself safe until my nervous system could learn something new and could have the experiences of a new way of being.